Welcome back to the Rules of Engagement. Before I jump into our second segment, let me remind you guys, if you ever miss any Rules of Engagement episodes, you ever miss any WCS content, MLG content, play of the days, comments of the days, all this awesome stuff here, go ahead and check out our YouTube channel, youtube.com/official MLGSC2 for all your needs as far as Starcraft goes for free in 1080p quality. So our second segment is going to be on the PvP, talking about a mobility-based army versus a very powerful army as far as just in a straight-up engagement goes. And first we'll talk about the dynamics of those two compositions. Then we'll talk about the role of Tempest in PvP and also when to engage in the late game in PvP and when to make sure to try to delay the engagement, adopt a more defensive posture. So we'll start this replay off at the 8-minute mark. And it's going to be Minigun versus State. Of course, this was from Group F, the Challenger Group State, just a couple days ago. And both players fast expanded. It's pretty passive PvP. Units lost. Each player lost a scouting probe. Very basic stuff. Here's the difference. Minigun going for Colossi. State going the route of Twilight Tech. Getting Dark Shrine as well. It's scouted, so DTs won't do damage. But it's not the end of the world. It's still nice to have the tech open. And when he realizes the DTs, he can't rely on to do insane damage. Going to go for that Blink as well. Now going forward here, you can see, okay, he's going to have Blink. He's going to have Dark Templar. He's going to be building a Warp Prism, right? So he can warp in units to harass. He has Blink Sarkis to harass. So you fast forward. Once those two things come into action, here's the difference, right? Minigun has the Colossus. State has, well, is about to have Blink Stalkers. There we go. Now he has Blink Stalkers. And he has the ability to counterattack with the Warp Prism, right? So he has all these units positioned around the map. And the important thing to realize is one, if he pauses to look at army value, right? Both players are fairly even. But in a straight-up engagement, the player with the Colossi tech is going to win the battle. It's just that simple. Colossi are more valuable than gateway units per cost, right? So if you have even army sizes, Colossi gateway is going to be pure gateway. Colossi gateway is typically going to be, you know, a Phoenix composition as well. And of course, Warp Prism doesn't help out in the actual engagement. Well, it's nice to be the Warp in, but a Pylon can do that as well. So Minigun would be strong in a direct battle. But State is more mobile, so Minigun can't just walk across the map and kill State's third base, right? Because if he does that, State can threaten to counterattack. So Minigun's goal is to get the battle into a straight-up fight. If he can force State to fight him, he's going to win. State's goal is going to be using mobility to keep Minigun at bay while State techs up and tries to get a stronger army, or while he tries to out-expand Minigun. And if you're ever playing the mobility-based gameplay, is a super important thing to realize, and it's this simple. You always need to be a threat in counterattacks. So what does that mean as far as positioning units around the map? It means this, right? Your opponent, let's say, they're guarding these three bases, right? This is what they need to defend. That section of the map, the first three. Your opponent's goal is to move out, attack you, and deny your third base, right? That's what Minigun wants to do. He wants to send his army out here, and he wants to cross the map and attack. So now, you as the mobility player, right? Let's say you're the mobility player. How do you avoid them crossing the map and attacking you? Well, you have your units outside their base, right? This is your army right here, right? You have your army out here. You have your army Warp Prism here. So if they leave, you run in and you counterattack. Now, the most important thing to just realize, when he pushes out, don't run your army back to your base. That's no good. If you run your army back to your base, what happens? He chases you. You're in your base. He attacks your base. He has a better army. He wins the game. What you want to do, you want to run the army to the sides, right? Because if you run to the sides, then if he chases you, he's not going to your base. The whole goal is he doesn't go to your base. If you run to the side and he goes to your base, you can counterattack. If he chases you, you just keep running in circles around the sides, right? You just keep running in circles, use that mobility, never run back to your base. This looks kind of complex, I start doodling. Basic idea is that you run to the side, right? Your army's here. Don't run back to your base. Always run to the sides so you can threaten counterattacks, right? And if he chases you to the sides, you circle back to the middle, but never run back to your base. Always stay towards his base or towards the remote part of the map, or if he's going towards that direction, it doesn't help him pin you anywhere. So back in the game, that's exactly how Minigun's going to try to, State's going to try to position his units, right? He's going to try to keep his armies out here. He's going to, stay aggressive, but he's not going to engage, right? Is Minigun in space? He is. Okay, back off. If Minigun moves out, he doesn't keep running back. He runs to the right, and he threatens to blink back to natural. Or he runs to the left and threatens to attack back in here, right? So the important thing is that you have to always be a threat in a counterattack. You can only threaten a counterattack if your army is always near one of your opponent's bases, right? So just constantly keep checking in and seeing if you can do any damage. Now, the one thing that's important is that to threaten a counterattack, you have to have units near your opponent's base, which means you can't afford to be losing your army. Now, ideally, you don't have to keep replacing this counterattacking force, so you never want to lose these units. Maybe you lose a Stalker here or there, maybe you lose a Dark Templar trying to harass like that, but the War Prism ideally always stays alive, the Stalker force always stays alive. Because if you ever lose that force, you'll lose the ability to counterattack, and without... Oh, look, it's like right there, right? If you saw what happened there, he meant to blink out and he misclicked, right? We'll watch that once more time. So he goes into counterattack, right? Say his point of view here. He says, okay, let's see this. And on slow speed, you can see he misclicks the blink. He tries to blink out, and he blinks up there. And now all of a sudden, he's going to lose his counterattacking force. Because, of course, with blink cooldown, he's just going to get run down, and he's going to die. Now he has one other counterattacking option, that's the War Prism. So it's super important that this stays alive. But then he says, okay, I put my tech, I'll move this in, and all of a sudden the War Prism gets almost dead. And now that this can be stopped by a single Stalker. And as a player with the more powerful army, this is what's super important. Minigun realizes, my opponent made the mistake, he can't threaten a counterattack. Now I'm going to move out and attack him. This is the opportunity for Minigun to exercise the fact that he's got a stronger army, right? And even if this army value, if he didn't lose the 5-6 Stalkers, would be pretty even. But 5-6 Stalkers would not help out in direct engagement versus this type of composition. Like, Stalkers just aren't very good in PvP, mid and late game engagements. Their stats are low, their damage is low, and their cost is high. And their hit points are the same as a Zealot, but they cost twice as much roughly. So they're not ideal units in an actual engagement. Obviously, you want to have a few, they're mobile. And this is where I get to another situation. He's taking a moment to attack. State's been going Tempest. So this is where I want to spend a brief moment talking about the role of Tempest in PvP and how they can affect things, right? So there's Tempest basically do no damage to any units except for massive air units. Now, Colossi count as massive air units because they're massive units and they're hit by anti-air attacks, right? So Tempest do a lot of damage to Colossi. Now, it's important to realize that they do a lot of damage, but it's still not insane damage. It's like they still do less damage to Colossi per second than like an Immortal, a Missile Turret, things like that, but they have high range. The other thing important to realize is it's similar to if you're going Corruptors or Vikings versus Colossi. In that, if your Tempest, Vikings, Corruptors, whatever it is, are attacking the Colossi, they're the only units in the battle attacking the Colossi. The rest of your army, all the Zealots, Immortals, Archons, they're not going to be attacking the Colossi because there's going to be all the other units in between your army and the Colossi. So, unless you have enough Tempests to take out a couple of Colossi right at the start of the battle, that it's actually almost bad that those Tempests are shooting the Colossi because it's anti-focus fire. The rest of your army is all attacking the Zealots and killing those. The Tempests are weakening the Colossi, but unless you have enough to actually take them out quickly, just taking the shields off Colossi doesn't affect their army in the engagement. So, there's a moment in time where there's only a few Tempests, right? If there's only a few Tempests, they're not going to be good against Colossi, and that's the weakness that a Colossi player can exploit in an actual engagement. If you look at this, let me look at the army compositions here. Go to Units tab. If you look at the Units tab here, it's 6 Colossi versus 2 Tempests, right? And then there's a bunch of other gateway units. Both players have, 11 Zealots, some Immortals, some Archons, whatever. The 2 Tempests will 3-shot 1 Colossi. But with an attack rate of 3.3, it'll take him 10 in-game seconds to kill a Colossi. In those 10 seconds, the Colossi have already killed their Zealots. So that's what I mean. Unless you have enough Tempests to take out the Colossi fast before they kill your Zealots, they're not going to be that useful in the major engagement. So there's a timing window where if you're going Colossi, you can exploit and try to take out one of your opponent's bases. It's exactly what Minigun does here. He's back in the game here real quick. You can see he goes for that timing window. And if we look at these 2 Tempests, look what they're doing. They do 2 shots, they weaken the Colossus, right? 2 shots again, they weaken it again. And 1 more shot, boom, now it's dead. But what's happened? He's already lost the Nexus, already lost a lot of probes. And of course, if his army tried to actually engage there, he would have been melted, right? In the time it took him to kill the 1 Colossi, he would have lost all of his Zealots to the other Colossi. Minigun, of course, doesn't want to try to charge up the ramp, so he's just going to back away, saying, okay, I'm happy I killed that Nexus. And now if he runs all the way back, you can see he's going to transition. Ideally, you add Void Rays. You don't really want to use Stalkers just because, remember, I talked about Stalkers aren't actually good in engagements in general. I mean, for pure Tempest, of course, you're going to win. But ideally, versus Tempest, you're going for those Void Rays. So that's why he's adding in this triple Stargate transition here. With 3 bases, he should win. Now, the one disadvantage is right now we're in a situation where should Minigun be engaging. And this is not quite a super late game situation. Nobody's maxed out yet. But we can still talk about when to engage in PvP. An important thing is to recognize, okay, whose composition will get weaker over time, right? Well, over the next 5 minutes, Minigun will add in Void Rays, which will counter the Tempest very well. And both players will add in a bunch of buffer units. But the buffer units of State are just going to die to Colossi very fast, whereas buffer units of Minigun are going to help them out a lot because, look at right now, Minigun only has 9 Zealots. Once those die, all these 6 Immortals are now going to be useful. If Minigun can add in more Zealots and Archons, all of a sudden, State's the bulk of his composition is these Immortals. They're going to be useless. So over time, it actually favors Minigun. His composition will get better. State's composition will not get better. He can't really add 2 more useful units. Maybe 1 more Tempest would be nice, but the Void Ray production, it's not going to do too much. So this is actually not an ideal engagement for Minigun, just because of the fact that he really wants more Zealots before he can engage. And then, of course, he's actually just going to warp in a lot more Stalkers, which aren't Zealots, so when he's trying to go for the Tempest, you're always going to die to the Immortals. And that's going to give State a little bit of a chance to get back in the game. And as you can see here, because of the Stalkers versus Immortals, Olsen State has this army advantage. He's going to try to push it to go ahead and knock Minigun out. Minigun, though, is able to just barely get enough Void Rays out in time. He's going to go ahead and deflect the attack. A pretty interesting battle here. Again, the Immortals aren't too useful as long as you can warp in enough additional support units. But now we're in a situation where it's kind of equalized. Both players are damaging each other. State's trying to retake the 3rd base. It got canceled again. Minigun scrambling to recover from their harass. But Minigun ends up being ahead, right? But he's not ahead enough that he can feel so he can just walk across the map and end the game. So now we are in an interesting situation that happens a lot in PvP. One player's ahead, but it's hard to tell how much ahead he is, right? Minigun doesn't know State's economy. He doesn't know his exact food supply. The game's been a little crazy, so it's hard to get an exact number. Same thing with State. Just now, he sent the DT and he scouted his opponent's army. Now State knows a couple things. Seeing the army size and the Void Ray count, he can know, number 1, okay, my opponent's army is much larger than mine. Number 2, his economy cannot be that much better than mine. Why is that true? Well, because if we take a look at Income tab, he's got 57 probes, and right now the economy's not good, but once his 4th gets up, alright, he can transfer some of these probes from his main, and these probes will be useful. And yes, he won't have the same economy, but he's going to have a pretty okay 3-base economy. It's not going to be light years behind the economy, basically. Same question. Whose composition will get better over time? Well, this is a situation where if you look at this, right now, let's forward this a little bit more, as he's moving around thinking about engaging. Right? So State, of course, here, jump over to his actual screen. He's thinking about engaging here. And right now, right, State has more Zealots than his opponent. He also has Psystorm. What does Minigun have? Minigun has a lot of Void Rays and a couple Colossi. So over time, if Minigun can add in more units to tank for his Colossi and a couple more Colossi, he's going to have a better composition. Why is he going to have a better composition? Because the Zealot-heavy composition is going to get weaker if they can't overrun the Colossi quickly. And that won't happen if there's more Colossi and if there's more meat in front of them. So if both players add Zealots, Minigun Zealots help more than State's Zealots because they have Colossi behind them, so they're tanking and doing damage, whereas State's Zealots aren't tanking for anything beyond other Zealots. So compositionally, Minigun will get better over time. But what's also a very important factor when to engage is the fact that Minigun is much closer to being maxed, right? Whereas State is only 130 food. Now, it's sometimes hard to identify the exact foods of your opponents in the game, which is why these mistakes happen. But you have to realize over time, he can only improve 30 food. State can improve 70 food. So State will actually be able to improve his army more. So waiting will help him more as far as army composition, or as far as army strength. It'll hurt him in army composition. So there's the 2 things you have to factor in when you're deciding whether or not to engage. In this case, in a game here, we can see State is posturing aggressively, and he's doing so because he's like, well, I may not have too much supply right now, but I feel I need to engage now because my production is so warp gate focused, right? 10 warp gates and only 1 Stargate and 1 Robo. versus an opponent who's much more Stargate and Robo focused. So while I can produce a whole ton of Warp Gate units, if I sit back and let it build up 5-6 Colossi, my Warp Gate units are not going to be too useful, right? So that's why State feels compelled to attack. On the other hand, yes, compositionally he'll get weaker, but supply-wise, he can improve supply much more than Minigun. So it's a very tough situation who the attack favors. State thinks it's a great engagement for him. And, you know, it's hard to tell if he didn't engage here how the game would have gone. There's no doubt that Minigun is a little ahead, but it's still recoverable for State, potentially, if he was able to get tuner food. As is that he's going to engage. And, like I said, compositionally right now, it's a good engagement for State because it's not enough for Minigun to tank for the Zealots. And so the Immortals and Zealots of State are actually able to overrun the Colossi. Unfortunately, he's just too far behind in supply, and he can't really deal with the mass Void Rays in Minigun, right? Minigun has like 7 Void Rays, and there's only a couple of Archons there. Of course, Stalkers aren't going to do too much against Void Rays once the Archons are down, so they can't tank. And even though it was a decent trade for State, you know, in the end, just Minigun had 2 units, and the Void Rays overrun him. And then, as we can see here, now he's up by 50. Foodie's just going to go ahead, remax, and push across the map. He wins in about another minute or so, just from overwhelming numbers of units here. So we're going to pause it here. We need to watch the last minute or 2 of the game. But the one thing that's important there is to understand it's not always obvious who an engagement favors, but understand the 2 things to think about when you're trying to figure out who it should favor. 1, who's closer to being max, basically, who can add more supply to their army, potentially. And then 2, as they add supply, whose composition is going to get better over time, right? Which player, like if you have Colossi, you'd rather it get to a larger supply. Because in bigger numbers, the AoE does better, you have more units tanking for them, they just do better in bigger battles. Zealots do better in smaller battles, right? So those are 2 things to factor in. But the most important thing to remember is that if you're playing a mobility game, the threat of a counterattack is often better than the actual counterattack. We saw this game, State kept trying to poke him with Blink Stalkers and stuff. Sometimes that's good, you can do damage, but if you lose those Stalkers, you lose the threat of a counterattack. So often it's a good, you know, if you're Terran, you have Medivacs, you don't need to drop. Just sit the Medivacs somewhere where if the Protoss moves out, then you drop. Just the threat of the counterattack will force him at home, it'll keep him on the defensive. Whereas if you use the counterattack, if you try to utilize it and then you lose those units, now there's no threat anymore. So don't always feel compelled to constantly be attacking your opponent. You can just sit units in position to counterattack, and that threat can be very, very powerful, even more so than the counterattack itself very often. So this wraps up our second segment. We'll take a short break and we're right into our third segment.